Somewhere in Hamilton, there is a piece of paper, a legal name change document. A young man, raised from childhood by Sonny Fatupaito, given everything Fatupito could offer, named after his uncle as the highest possible expression of family honor in Pacific and Maori culture, sat down and signed that paper. He crossed out the name Sonny Fatu Jr. He wrote Junior Hart instead, deliberately, completely, permanently. That piece of paper never made the news. It never became a headline. It never got read out in a courtroom. But it is the most honest document in this entire story, because it tells you something that no press release, no government exemption, no $2.75 million funding announcement, and no prime ministerial defense on national radio ever could. That whatever Sonny Fatupaito built, the mosque guard, the all-female chapter, the COVID border crossing, the rehab program, the Arikinui title, 33 years of consistent public messaging, the young man he personally raised looked at all of it and chose something else. This video does not tell you what that means. It gives you two complete psychological portraits of the same man, both backed by verified evidence, and at the end, the call is yours. Hit subscribe now, because both portraits are real, and that is exactly what makes this one of the most genuinely difficult stories this channel has ever covered. Sonny Fatupaito has been inside the mongrel mob for 33 years. That single fact matters more than almost anything else in this story, because 33 years inside one of New Zealand's most powerful criminal organisations is not an accident. It is a life. A choice made and remade every single day across 3 decades. Somewhere in the late 1980s, a young man in Hamilton joined the mob. He did not leave. He did not get pushed out. He rose. He became chapter president. He broke away from the National Council, a move that within any hierarchical criminal organisation typically ends in violent retaliation rather than respected independence. He survived it. He gave himself the title Arikinui, a term drawn directly from Maori paramount chieftainship, traditionally held by the highest hereditary leaders of the Kingitanga movement. Not a gang rank, a cultural and political claim of the highest order. And then he built something no mongrel mob leader in New Zealand history had built before him. A brand, a narrative, a public identity so carefully constructed that it eventually produced the most extraordinary sentence ever spoken by a New Zealand Prime Minister about a gang leader. Jacinda Ardern, on national radio, personally defending his right to cross a lockdown border. That is where this story starts. A man who built something real, and around whom everything real kept falling apart. 2 portraits. Same man, same 33 years. You decide which one holds. Portrait 1 begins with a question nobody seems to ask about Sonny Fatupaito. What does it actually feel like to stand in front of a camera, after your own deputy has just pleaded guilty to importing commercial quantities of methamphetamine, and restate your zero-tolerance position in exactly the same words you have been using for years? Not as performance, as genuine belief. Because here is what Portrait 1 asks you to sit with. Fatupaito has restated that position after every single crisis this story contains. After Mark Griffith's arrest, after Michael Ormsby's conviction, after his brother defected, after his adopted son was charged. He has never once abandoned the language. Never gone quiet, never stopped fronting up. A man running a script purely for strategic purposes does not need to keep running it once the audience has already seen the cracks. He finds a new script. Fatupaito has used the same one for years, in the face of evidence that would have ended most public figures entirely. Portrait 1 says that consistency is not the behaviour of someone who is faking it. It is the behaviour of someone who genuinely believes what he is saying, and who has spent 33 years learning how little personal belief matters against structural forces that are simply too large for one person to shift on their own. Look at the specific people who let his stated values down. Mark Griffiths, known as Griff, was not some distant member Fatupaito had lost track of. He was second in command. A man who delivered guest lectures at the University of Canterbury about gang reform. A man who stood beside Fatupaito at the Hamilton Mosque Vigil in 2019, one of the most photographed moments in the chapter's entire public story. According to Fatupaito's own account, He learned about Griffith's drug operation when the armed offenders squad knocked on his door. That is what he says. And there is nothing verified on the public record that directly contradicts it. Portrait 1 asks you to sit with something genuinely uncomfortable. If Fatupaito's own second-in-command, the bloke who stood beside him at every major public moment, could run a commercial methamphetamine importation ring without Fatupaito knowing about it, what does that actually tell us? Not about Fatupaito's honesty, about the structural impossibility of what he was attempting. An organization of hundreds of members, drawn from communities shaped by generations of poverty, disconnection from whenua and whakapapa, and what the Royal Commission of Inquiry confirmed was systematic state abuse, does not change because one man at the top changes his stated values. It changes when the underlying conditions that produced it change. And those conditions in Hamilton's Waikato communities have not changed. Portrait 1's final exhibit is not Griffith's. It is not Ormsby. It is that piece of paper in Hamilton. The young man Fatupaito raised as his own son, who signed away his uncle's name. Portrait 1 says, that is not evidence that Fatupaito was dishonest. It is evidence that even the most intimate personal influence, fatherhood itself, is not enough to override the pull of financial opportunity and belonging that organized crime offers young men in communities where legitimate pathways remain structurally out of reach. That is not one man's failure as a leader. That is what happens when a single person tries to fix a broken system, without the system changing around him. Portrait 2 begins with a different question, not what Fatupaito feels, what Fatupaito built, and how precisely it was put together. In 2019, 2 years before the COVID border exemption, 3 years before Griffith's guilty plea, New Zealand police produced an internal intelligence report on the Waikato Mongrel Mob Kingdom chapter. That report was later released under the Official Information Act. Its characterization of the chapter's community outreach was direct and unambiguous. Police described it as propaganda, a deliberate public relations strategy designed to raise support, aid recruitment, and project a clean image, while an underlying criminal enterprise continued operating beneath it. That report was on file in 2021 when the government approved $2.75 million in kahukura funding. It was on file when Ardern personally defended the COVID border exemption on national radio. Somebody read it. Somebody decided to proceed anyway. Portrait 2 asks, why? Here is what Fatupaito had built by 2021 that made setting that police assessment aside the politically rational call. A professional spokesperson, Louise Hutchinson, managing every media interaction with precision, issuing press releases under titles like, "Again, not us," each time a new investigation surfaced. An academic relationship with Dr. Jared Gilbert, one of New Zealand's most credible gang researchers, whose public statements consistently framed the chapter's reform efforts as largely sincere, providing intellectual cover that a classified intelligence assessment could not easily override in a public debate. A carefully documented record of high-visibility community actions, the mosque guard, the food deliveries, the all-female chapter, each generating positive national media coverage that accumulated into a brand the government could point to when defending its partnership, and a funding mechanism, $2.75 million from the proceeds of Crime Fund, that created a financial relationship with the state significant enough that reversing it publicly would carry its own political costs, regardless of what subsequent criminal cases revealed. Portrait 2 points to something the proceeds of Crime Fund angle makes uniquely clear. That money was seized from criminals, including, in all likelihood, from drug operations connected to exactly the kinds of networks operating within and around the mob, meaning the financial loop ran like this. Drug money enters the criminal economy, police seize it, government redistributes it to an organization whose own deputy is simultaneously importing commercial quantities of the same drug the program claims to be fighting. Portrait 2 does not claim this was Fatupaito's conscious design. It claims something more unsettling, that a man with 33 years of experience navigating one of New Zealand's most complex criminal organizations, who built a media operation sophisticated enough to secure prime ministerial defense on national radio, did not need it to be conscious design. He needed only to understand what the government wanted, offer it convincingly, and ensure that when things went sideways, and they always went sideways, the distance between himself and the specific offending was just large enough to survive. The "again, not us" press releases, the "they'd already left the chapter" statements, the "I can't control individual choices" acknowledgements that landed after each conviction, consistently, precisely calibrated, never abandoning the reform narrative entirely, never accepting personal accountability for specific criminal conduct. Portrait 2's sharpest exhibit is not Griffith's. It is Fatupaito's response when Griffith's own lawyer told the court his client's association with the gang was finished. Standing outside the Hamilton High Court, Fatupaito told media the door was still open for Griffiths on his release. Not closed, not condemned publicly. Open. The deputy who had just been convicted of running a commercial meth ring while publicly standing beside the chapter's anti-meth campaign was told the door remained open. Portrait 2 asks, is that the response of a man who was genuinely blindsided by his deputy's conduct? Or is that the response of a man who understands that closing the door permanently on someone who knows everything about your organization carries a very different kind of risk? Here is where this story stops being about Sonny Fatupaito and starts being about something larger. Both Portrait 1 and Portrait 2 agree on one thing: what Fatupaito built actually worked. The COVID cluster in the mongrel mob Pacifica chapter in South Auckland, 4 positive cases, more than 20 people in managed isolation, was resolved within days of his intervention. Every member tested, every whānau member tested. Cluster closed. Government health officials confirmed it on the record. That happened. It is not disputed. Portrait 1 says it happened because Fatupaito genuinely cared and had built real trust in those communities over decades. Portrait 2 says it happened because Fatupaito had maintained real control in those communities, and the government was paying him to exercise it. The outcome was identical. The moral weight of that outcome depends entirely on which portrait you believe. And here is the question both portraits cannot get around. A 2019 police intelligence report called it propaganda, a university researcher called it sincere, a prime minister called it necessary. Griffiths called it the organization he was proud to represent, right up until the day he pleaded guilty to importing methamphetamine concealed inside printer toner cartridges sent via international courier to an address near Hamilton. And somewhere in Hamilton, a young man sits with a name that used to carry his uncle's legacy and chose to erase it, not because anyone forced him to, because he wanted to. Both portraits have been laid out in full. Both are supported by real, verified evidence from the public record. And both leave you with the same question at the center of Sonny Fatupaito's 33 years. Is it possible, genuinely possible, for a man to build real community good and provide real criminal cover at the same time, without those two things ever fully contradicting each other in his own mind? Psychology says yes. Moral licensing says the brain does not experience good deeds and harmful ones as cancelling each other out. It experiences them as separate accounts and draws from whichever one the moment requires. Courts are not built to answer that question. Governments are clearly not built to answer it either, as the decision to proceed with Kahukura funding, despite a classified police intelligence report describing it as propaganda, makes plain. Which leaves the question with you. Not reformer or puppet master as a forced binary, but something more honest. A man who may have been both, at different moments, in different rooms, with different people, across 33 years. And a system that needed him to be one thing clearly enough that it never looked too hard at the evidence suggesting he might be the other. Drop your verdict below. Portrait 1. Tragic reformer, overwhelmed by forces no single person could control. Portrait 2. Puppet master, running the most sophisticated long game in New Zealand gang history. And if you reckon the truth sits somewhere between them, say that too. Because honestly, that might be the most accurate answer on the table. What do you reckon?